I'm Shakara Maybone.
And I'm Jack Williams.
And welcome to Reeling It In, the podcast where we take a moment to reel in the best and worst film moments while keeping our commentary 100% real.
And today we're talking about rom-coms. So let's grab your popcorn and let's reel it in.
Yeah.
And today joining us, we have Amy.
Hi guys, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on this podcast today.
Of course.
Yes.
So I guess we can start with you, Amy. What is your experience with rom-coms? What's your favorites?
So I started, I don't know, I would say like middle school. I just really liked them because I thought it was like the cheesy stuff that are really cute. And then like, it's like the stuff that you think is gonna happen in like when you're in your 20s or like when you're in high school and stuff like that. And then just adding the comedy is just so hilarious. It could be stupid, but then it adds to the cheesy element. So I really like rom-coms, and they also like, this is gonna make me sound really dumb, but like it doesn't make you think, you know? There's
No, I don't think that's dumb at all. Like it's such a carefree, like movie genre. So
yeah. And like, I don't know, sometimes it's nice to rewind, not have to think too much about what does the director mean when they're doing this, or what does it mean when this actor is doing this. Like, you don't have to dig too deep into it like an English teacher would. You can just like, kick your feet back, just watch it. And it's like something that, can make you happy and stuff like that. So.
I so agree, and I feel like I actually, because I got into rom-coms, I feel like a lot more recently. I think it was over break. I kind of just got on like a rom-com kick, and that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about it. But I think it was definitely a response to me. Like I watch all these like films that require all this like analytic, like all these like interpretations. You need to like really dive deep into it to like understand it. And sometimes it's like I want to watch something I can just kick my feet back to. And yeah.
My grandma, she had like a lot of rom-coms growing up, like on the VHS. So I don't know, whenever she used to watch like her rom-coms, I used to just like sit along beside her and just be like, oh, and she used to tell me like, well, you don't understand it now, but you will understand it when you get older. Like, but yeah, rom-coms is most definitely one of my top genres for real.
Yeah, and like every time like my boyfriend and I have like a movie night, I'm always like suggesting things that are like cutesy. No, but yeah, because like you have to like think about it, and like he's like you. He likes the movies that like you have to think about. You really have to like those like mind bender movies. I'm like, oh my god. Like sometimes like I could have had a test or something. Like let me rewind, watch my little chick flick, and you can stay here or not if you want. Like
I also for me at least, I try to reject this notion that like certain films you can't provide, like you can't analyze. I think we tend to get in this idea, and I think I've talked about this before, but we get in this idea that like because one film is one way, you have to analyze it a bunch, and because another film is another way, it's like, oh, that's just like stupid, or it's just like this, it's just a rom-com. But I think what's so fun about it is like you can dig deeper into those movies, which I love to do, but I also I need my movies where I can just like not pay attention the whole time.
So I was just curious, like, why do you feel like rom-coms is, like, different today than it was, like, back in the early 2000s?
Well, I want to say, like, the 2000s was mostly, like, I feel like that was the height of rom-coms. I'm not saying, like, there isn't any right now, but I feel like there was just this, like, script that every one of them followed. It was either, like, I don't know, you meet someone when you're like going to get coffee or something. It was like that strict scripts that people would follow, and it wasn't like there just wasn't too much variety when it came to it. But I feel like, and there's obviously like the diversity thing that comes along with it as well. So that is like the main comparison that I would see from like back then, like the 2000s.
The only reason why I asked, because I was just like thinking, I was watching 13 Going on 30 because I seen it and it's so long, like I had to rewatch it because I was like, well, it's been a minute. And then I watched, what was it? It was To All the Boys I Love. I know, two different movies. You can't really compare them, in my opinion. But I was just thinking, like, well, I really haven't, like, seen, like, the promo for All the Boys I Love because it's more, like, on Netflix and, like, streaming, like, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank here. But I'm just saying, like, I think that's why, rom-coms doesn't really feel the same because you don't really get the same, like, push as, you know, it was in the early 2000s, because you want people to actually like go out to the movie theaters and see it and things like that. And I was just like curious, you know. So
There's also, not just with rom-coms, it's not something I've only noticed with rom-coms, but the early 2000s, they had like, it was an aura almost. Like, and I think the two main genres I see it with is rom-coms and action. Action movies in the early 2000s had this like very distinct style.
yeah,
Like,
you know what? The last like really big action movie that I feel like would have that same feel was, I mean, just a tad bit, Proud Mary. Have you seen that movie before?
I have not, no.
It's with Taraji. Henson. Oh, well, it's a good movie. You should check it out. But yeah, I really agree. So
Yeah, like, yeah, they had just like, I tend to think of like Daredevil, right? The Hellboy movies. They just they made use of like over the top music a lot. These sort of like grand action sequences that I feel like you don't see it today. But I think on the rom-com note, for me, it was a little hard. It was harder for me to kind of nail down what exactly that distinctiveness was with those early 2000s movies, because like what was the last like new rom-com I watched? It was probably the Sydney Sweeney movie.
Anyone But You.
Anyone But You, yeah. And I feel like that, in a way, kind of emulated that. But if you watch that and compare it to something like 13 Going on 30, Harry Met Sally, it's just like so different.
well, if you want to get like technical with like the film in general, I think it's just like the overall visual style of it. Like you have the warmer tones, you know, like the dreamy lightning, you know, like the sunset or like the sunrise, you know, you at the beach and things like that. And then the costume, like specifically pinpointing for 13 Going on 30 and Legally Blonde, you have all these bright colors, you know, pink, red, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I think that's what the difference is versus, you know, the modern films nowadays. It seems kind of just a bit like, I'm not like crapping on the, you know, modern, but it seems just a bit monotone, you know, like, so.
I think it also kind of has to do with like the delivery of the cheesiness, because I feel like it was very much accepted back then for all the actresses and actors to do that. But I feel like when you compare it to something like Anyone But You, it's very like cringe in a way. Like I found myself cringing through some of the scenes. I'm like, what are they doing? But like, yeah.
Like earlier 2000 movies also had that little bit of cringeness.
That's what I'm curious now. Is there an aspect of it, because we're viewing it 20 years later, that like we just don't, we just like maybe 20 years from now we'll look back and be like, oh, like those early 2020 movies, like they had this like vibe. We just don't. I wonder if that's why, but I don't know. I also feel like these movies have been kind of hailed as like classics, like even when they were like, when they first came out. But I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't alive when like Harry Met Sally came out, but.
Oh, can we talk about that when Harry Met Sally? Let's take it all. Well, it wasn't all the way back. What, that movie came out like in 97 or something like that?
Yeah, I think it was late 90s.
Yeah, okay, so there's the thing. I like late 90s rom-com. Like, have you guys seen My Best Friend Wedding with Julia Roberts?
I have not,
I don't think I have.
No? Okay. Well, I really love that movie. So, yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
What, Harry Met Sally?
Yes.
Yeah. Harry Met Sally, first of all, my introduction to this movie was in my, I think, junior year of high school. I had a teacher who, she would always be like, men and women can't be friends. She was my, like, sex ed teacher, which was kind of funny. But the fact that she had this, like, crazy, it was controversial within the school because everyone was always like, oh, no, like, men and women can be friends, whatever. But she would always just, like, stick by it. And then if you took her sort of, like, the follow-up to the sex ed class, which like you didn't have to take, but it was an elective, I took it. She like had us watch When Harry Met Sally, and then she basically just like used it as evidence as to like why what she's saying is correct. But yeah, if you haven't seen When Harry Met Sally, spoiler, Billy Crystal makes this point early in the film that men and women can't be friends because the sex stuff always gets in the way. And Sally's like, oh no, that's not true. I have a ton of male friends. And then of course in the end they get together. But
which interesting. It is interesting that she said that because we have not seen not one male friend that, you know, Sally mentioned. So I just thought that was interesting, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's also kind of, it does play on like the trope of like the friends to lovers, I guess, because I feel like a lot of those early 2000s films, like late 90s, kind of relied on like 13 Going on 30, with the Mark Ruffalo and who's the main girl in that? Is that Julia Roberts? Or am I making that?
And
13 going on 30?
No, Jennifer Garner.
Jennifer Garner.
No, that's fine.
One thing about me is I have crazy face blindness when I watch movies sometimes.
Actually,
That's someone.
oh my God, do you watch Abbott Elementary? Sidetracked?
I have not, no.
Okay, so you know when Barbara always get like the people, like the celebrity wrong? That's him. But yeah, speaking of trope, you know, one thing I noticed about like the early 2000 film is that the guy always leave his ex-girlfriend, or not his ex-girlfriend, his girlfriend, his fiance, or his wife for like the one he thought he loved.
Always taken at the start, and then
What's up with that? Because when I was watching 13 going on 30, and I was like thinking about these other films that I watched, I was like, sigh. I don't like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That is so bold.
That's like going back to like the same script. It's always like the same script, whether it's like, you know, different characters or whatever, different life stories. It always just like reverts back to that same script, and that's like what I think is like the key differentiating factor between those back then and like those like right now.
And that's, I think, when we talk about like things being like easy to watch, you know, I think that definitely plays into it, because it's like I can watch this and I know exactly what's going to happen by the end of it.
Oh,
yeah.
But then there's always like a gimmick, you know, like 13 going on 30, there's like the, you know, she's older, and like there's Serendipity, if you guys have seen that one, where the gimmick is like they talk about like fate the whole time, and it's like you know, you don't actually know if they're going to meet towards the end, but like obviously they are, because it wouldn't be a movie if they didn't. But
you know, I feel like what's an underrated rom-com? Bring It On, the original one. Like the very first one.
I don't think I've seen the first one.
No?
But I've seen like one in the series. I don't know which one it is, but I've seen one.
Wow, that's such a good film.
when did the original come out?
Like in 2000.
Oh,
Yeah.
when was it rebooted then?
I don't think they have reboots. It's just like a long
okay, I get what you're saying.
franchise,
Yeah.
Like, I only say it as original because after a while, the franchise just gets sucky, in my opinion. But
Yeah, sure.
yeah, you know what else? I feel like what's really, you know, defying like the early 2000 rom-coms, I just feel like the casting, for one, like back then you knew like Julia Roberts, you knew Jennifer Garner, you knew what's his name? He was in the one movie with Jennifer Lopez, The Wedding Planner. The co-star. Matthew
McConaughey?
I think so.
Is he? Because I know he was in a couple of other.
McConaughey, yeah, that is
okay.
him, yes. I just feel like, you know, you had like the big stars on screen. Like, okay, you have Sydney, what was her name again? Sweetie. I knew that was her name. I just didn't want to butcher it.
I was just about to say that, though. Like, the new one, you had it's like two really big, like, you know.
Like, you have them, but like, I don't know what it is. Like, back then, everybody knew them. And that's what I just noticed now with like with the modern rom-coms. You just don't really know the actors and actors, which is good because, you know, you have to like start a new whole generation, you know, of like the face of like, oh, the America's sweetheart and stuff like that. So that's just an observation I had. So, you know.
I wonder if that like comes with time though, because well, obviously they were pretty big like back when it was actually made, but then we look back and we like see them from like present movies as well as those movies, and we're like, oh my gosh, like they're iconic. We know them through XYZ. But then like it might be their breakthrough movie for people in the actors and actresses in these modern rom-coms, and then we look back like 20 years later and like, oh my gosh, like this like person started at this movie. So
it just reminded me of like Issa Rae. Have you seen Insecure before? Well, it's a TV show, but oh man, you should watch it. But it just reminded me of her. Like, I feel like if rom-coms would be like not similar to like the early 2000s, but like a little bit like toe-to-toe, but a little bit more like modernized, I feel like Issa Rae would be the one to like change that, honestly.
Why is that?
Because you have to watch her work to understand, like, she have, like, first of all, I believe soundtrack makes all the movies.
That's definitely definitive of those early 2000s ones. It would
Exactly.
Just, they would throw in a song that would be like, okay.
And if you watch Insecure, if you're a fan of Insecure, everybody know, like, the soundtrack makes up that show, too. But you also have, like, the actors and the actress and things like that, and the great storyline. So that's why I feel that way, you know? But she also stay trending by, like, talking about, like, social commentary that's happening right now, like, you know, if men and women can be friends, or, like, who should be paying for the date and things like that. So I think that's what grabs the audience back, if that makes sense. So, yeah.
It definitely, yeah, I think the rom-com's ability to address sort of, issues in romance, I think is overlooked. Like when I was talking about like being able to analyze like a rom-com, I think you can do it like through that lens. One example I think is, have you guys seen Mr. and Mrs. Smith?
Oh,
Yes.
Classic, right?
I grew up watching
No, like
it.
classic. You know, love Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and I think it definitely. And honestly, what's crazy about that is
Have
I think
you
it.
seen the show?
That's what I was about to get to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like so excited.
But the original, it definitely, it was action and it was romance.
Yeah.
You know, and back to what I was talking about those both had like sort of distinct styles in the early 2000s. I think it embodied both of those, which is crazy because you just mentioned it. But when we think about like the new one, right, like the Donald Glover one, they take it's the same thing, right, the same premise, but they take a totally different like, I guess, perspective on it. Like it's still funny and there's still action, but when they talk, it's almost like the character, they feel a lot more real. You know, it feels like a real conversation or like a real like argument or whatever you'd have with your significant other. Like when I'm thinking of the scene on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
You know, where they're talking about like his mom and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what more of these modern rom-coms is adopting a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like, it's like more realistic. Like, you know, in the early 2000s, you do have like the storyline where the girl gets broken up with or gets dumped or she find out her man is cheating and things like that. And she, I don't know, glow up. Honestly, what I observed in like in these newer films, that's not really a big issue. You know, it's more like a mutual breakup and things like that.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, okay, I like to be single. It's fine, you know? So what? You know, if you get what I'm saying? So, yeah, I most
More
definitely agree with
empowerment.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, for the individual.
And it's like more like variety too. It's not like there's just like you said, like someone gets broken up with, but there's stuff like that one movie where Jane the Virgin, like that actress, someone great or something like that. Like she gets broken up with after like 8 years, and then she's like finding herself again. So like that, like there's like tropes that like you wouldn't expect kind of, but it's also very much relatable because someone could be going through the same thing that she is. So I think that's like really cool that they're incorporating like real life scenarios, like you said, that wasn't present in the past.
Yeah, and it definitely like allows you to connect to them and still like find it funny and find entertaining. Like I love the original Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I don't see myself in any of those like conversation because they're just so like wacky and bizarre and and obviously there's like themes in those movies. There's themes present in those movies that like you can probably relate to, but in the newer version, you know, I can relate more to those characters. Like I can see myself there, which I think is honestly is the goal of like a good movie or a good show, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah.
Being able to see yourself in the characters.
Most definitely.
But I think they've definitely. It's almost like because it's not totally adopting like a serious tone, right? But what I love about there's a clear distinction, right? Because you have like rom-coms and you have regular romance movies, you know. And what's almost funny about that is rom-coms obviously make you laugh. Regular romance movies are often associated with like sad emotions. You know, there's always like an ending that's supposed to make you cry, or you know, it ends in tragedy or whatever. Which I always find that parallel like pretty funny.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's weird because then you see like people like Nicholas Sparks who obviously make tearjerker romantic movies.
Sure, yeah.
But I really haven't like. I feel like there's very like a scarce amount of like movies where it's like romantic, but it's like a happy ending.
Yeah.
But like without like that undertone of like comedy or anything, like literally just following the same script as a regular romantic movie, but without the tearjerker part, I feel like is kind of like rare to find in a way.
It's like if the movie's not wacky and goofy, then it's probably going to be sad.
Yeah, and there's like no happy medium kind of in between. So I think that's kind of
like even though this is a historical drama, but like the Titanic, for instance, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, no, that's a romance. I mean, people I think consider that like one of the greatest like romances
or like
of all time. But, like,
it's this movie. Well, I don't know if you guys seen it. It's by Tyler Perry. It's called Why Did I Get Married? First of all, that movie is so toxic. I hate it, actually. But yeah, it's like, I mean, it's a rom-com, but like it's so much drama in that. Like,
yeah. So that's interesting to me. I'll always think about that. I think maybe because you're talking about striking a medium. I think one of those movies, the only one that comes to my mind, I think would be La La Land.
Yeah.
Because that's like, but it's still a sad ending. You know, like it's still. I mean, but it's a bit more melancholy. But yeah, it's like that's definitely a gonna start thinking about that a lot more. I'm gonna search if you guys have any romance movies that you think have a happy ending and are not rom-coms. Email me, jack.williams@statenews.com. We're always looking for people to email in. But one more thing I wanted to talk about is sex in movies, which isn't necessarily just talking about rom-coms or romance movies. But I think one would assume that sex is actually like, we've seen like an uptake in that in film, and we actually haven't. According to The Economist, a story they did back in 2024, it looks like, they actually discovered that there is less sex in big movies right now. What do you guys make of that?
That's crazy. Because I feel like there's like a time and place for it. Especially like, I understand when it's like a rom-com or like a romantic movie, and like obviously there's like innuendos like throughout, like, you know, like you kind of get that one's leading to the other, but like there's some movies I'm like, is that really like necessary? Like, does it add anything to the plot? The one big like argument that I saw was like when Oppenheimer came out. Now I personally haven't seen Oppenheimer, but like I do know there is a sex scene in it, and like knowing my knowledge about Oppenheimer and like the time period, did they really have to show a sex scene?
No,
I don't know.
That's so real.
It was I think there was a sex scene, and then there was the other scene where
Oh, no.
Oh, there was another scene.
I was thinking about another film.
Yeah. There was another scene where, I don't even know how to describe it, because it was really weird, but he was, he's in this room, and they're all, like, interrogating him about, I think it was, like, being a communist or whatever.
Okay.
And there's a scene where he's kind of, like, having these hallucinations that, you know, it's kind of trying to, like, portray his, like, he's not in the right state of mind.
Okay.
And then he's naked. And then they cut to, like, the people asking questions, and they cut back, and his wife is there, and they're like having sex like in front of them, but like obviously the people can't see it. That's how I remember it. But I think it was that was another one of the things people were referencing. It's like, was that really like did we need to see that?
Yeah. And I just feel like it's like thrown in there somewhere on any of the stuff that I watch. Obviously there's like stuff like Euphoria where like
Insecure.
it's crazy.
Like Insecure. Oh, most definitely.
Well, it's crazy you mention Euphoria, because I think the caveat to this was that while there's less sex in movies, there's more sex in TV.
Oh,
People can get away with that now.
what?
You know.
That's
I think now that you said that, I do realize that a lot. So yeah.
And I think Euphoria, obviously, like great example of that. And I guess sexual content. So I guess that includes like nudity and stuff. But I think the primary reason for that is before like 2000s, I guess people started. Companies started realizing if we make movies PG-13, we can appeal to a wider audience, more money, right? And obviously when you have a PG-13 movie, you can't really have as much sex. So I think that's the primary driver. But then with TV, it makes sense because you have a more specialized audience. You know, not everyone's watching Euphoria every weekend or whatever.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's the levels, honestly, that should be necessary. Well, like it's like what Emmy say, like time and place, you know. It just depends on the plot of the movie.
Yeah.
Now, if it's something like, I don't know, what's a good film?
like a rom-com?
Just in general.
What did we blank on the movie podcast
Let's
about?
see.
What's a good movie?
I don't know.
Let's take La La Land.
Okay.
Right,
talk about
exactly. I just feel like it shouldn't be like hard, you know, core. You know?
Yeah. No, I get what you're
So
saying.
yeah, I really agree with Amy. Like it's just the time and place, honestly. And I just feel like the levels, like if it's just too much, like it's just too hardcore. I think that's what throws out the audience, in my opinion. I mean, it's a no-brainer, but
I think it's also just, I agree with that. And I think back in the day, or pre-2000s, you had a lot of like, you had a lot more, I feel like, experimentation in film. 1950s to 2000, you had a lot more experimentation in film. So there were a lot more people who were like willing to experiment with ideas of sex and ideas of nudity, and they were really playing with that idea of time and place. And then by the time the 2000s rolls around, it looks like there was more of like a set, like, okay, there is a time and place, and you should probably follow that directive, you know, like you should know what the time and place is. Whereas back in the day, they were just kind of like, let's explore that, you know, let's talk about that. Let's have a conversation about that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I also agree with what Kyra said, because I think there's like a fine line in some films where it's just like, you know, like you said, or like intent, like for the audience to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
I just just thought of a film. So, have you guys seen Queen and Slum?
No.
No. Oh my gosh, you should see that.
Like all movie recommendations.
Such a good movie. Oh my gosh. But it was a scene. Okay, so basically it's about they wasn't even a couple, it was just about two Black people. You know, they was like out, and then one of them was a lawyer, and then they got pulled over, and you know, police, all that extra stuff. So the lawyer decided to do something crazy. You know, I'm just going off my head. I'm not really, you know, but she decided to like do something crazy that would like jeopardize their freedom and stuff like that. So basically they'll be on the run. It's like a Bonnie and Clyde type situation. Yeah. So while they was on a
I've seen this. Sorry.
Okay, you have seen it.
I know exactly.
Yes. Okay, so you know the scene I'm talking about then, the sex scene.
Yeah.
When that movie came out, like when that movie first came out, everybody was so pissed at that scene because it was just like, okay, like what's the? But I'm not gonna hold you up. Thinking about it and looking back on it, I feel like it was a bit necessary if you just like look into it deeper because you got to understand like. Two Black people on a run, you know.
No, but I think that's like a good that is a time and place, you know, like on the run.
Yeah, that's
like
what I'm
saying.
saying.
Together. Yeah, there's a time.
You know,
and place.
like you never know they're gonna like survive for one because.
So yeah,
yeah,
I mean, it definitely like there's something to be said there. I think about it.
I'm so sorry. I just have to like put that out there.
No, I 100% agree. Or like I think whenever we talk about like queer representation in cinema, and this is why when you hear people who like try to advocate for less queer stuff in like books and movies and stuff like that. Sorry, I'm getting kind of political here, but you see that they're always like, oh, like we don't need our kids looking at sex. But then it's like, okay, like how do we talk about sexuality without portraying sex in some way? And then then you realize it's kind of just a guise for homophobia. So I think definitely, and when we see a lot more queer representation on screen nowadays, sex becomes like it becomes important, you know?
Yeah, most definitely.
So then I guess it kind of forces us to question, like, who's determining that time and place dynamic, you know? Who's setting that directive for us when we talk about, like, sex in movies? I think we should always be questioning that, you know?
I feel like it always go back to patriarchy.
No, 100%, yeah. I mean... we talk about more sex in the 1900s, but it was heterosexual, like
That's a good question. I'm gonna like actually think about that.
Yeah, it's something for you guys to think about going forward. But I don't know. Looking forward, I like to think that the state of the movie industry right now is sort of on its way to becoming. I feel like we're on our way to another like sort of another experimental revolution in film, like some new movement that's coming out. So maybe someday, maybe in the future, we'll end up getting more sex in movies than we have now. But I'm curious. That's just my 2 cents.
Yeah. I just think it's more kind of normalized now.
Yeah.
Rather than before. Kind of adding on to your point. So that might make it seem as though we're like kind of, what is that word? You're like used to it. Desensitized.
There you go.
There we go. I wrote an article on this too, but like, or not on this topic, but desensitization. But I feel like kind of now that like we're seeing more of it, we've grown kind of desensitized to it, and it seems like we're seeing more than we actually are. So that could be an explanation as to why like statistically there isn't an increase in the sex scenes.
Yeah, I mean there was explicitly it was like 20% less, which I thought was like really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think that was using higher grossing movies. So maybe like with experimental stuff, there is still like the same amount because I mean those movies tend to gross a little less, but we also get less experimental movies in general now, I think, than we did back in the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, do we still want that early 2000 like feel though?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was just gonna say, I think maybe for like the nostalgia, because like what I'm kind of comparing this to is like how people are really fixated on like 2016 and those vibes.
Yeah.
Like it gets to a point.
I miss 2016.
For
children, like
for sure. But like it kind of like gets to a point where I feel like if we don't like step out of the past and the nostalgia, like how are we going to move forward?
change?
So there's obviously like
Or
the
evolve.
moment. Yeah. There's like moments where you're just like, oh, like the 2000s, like that vibe was so great, like the little chick flicks, like the cheesiness. But then like if we kind of dwindle on that, if we keep making movies on that, like are we gonna go progress forward and get like maybe unlock more genres and scripts within
a new era?
Yeah, a new era basically within like rom-coms.
Yeah, I definitely think we shouldn't confine ourselves to one. And I feel like every time someone tries to recreate a time period in film, it just never.
Yeah.
I mean, homages 100% is like, I think like we always make an homage. We should always be like homaging to previous things. I think it's great. But yeah, I think when we try to just like recreate an era that is from the past or better left in the past, then it's not gonna be a good movie.
I just want more warmer tones in films. Like, I don't know what it is. I just feel like it's a euphoric feeling, you know? So.
This has been Reeling It In. I'm Jack Williams.
And I'm Kyra Maybone.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.